Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Cheryl Selman, and welcome to Living a Totally Healthy Life on Total Health TV. It's great having you join us for another episode and another really powerful conversation that will be in store for you today. I also want to say that because we are committed to having truthful conversations, open conversations, having conversations that at times will challenge the narrative that we find in mainstream media, there may come a day when you may not be able to find us on YouTube. So just letting you know that there is another place to go, and that is our website, totalhealthtelevision.com. So please like us over there, opt in, and know that at any time you can get all of our interviews, no matter what's happening out there in the internet reality. So, having said that, I want to introduce my guest today, and I'm really thrilled to have on the show today David Martin, because we're going to be investigating truth from fiction when it comes to not just COVID-19, but really all that has eventuated as a result of this unprecedented transformation in our societies around the world. And David truly is an inspirational guest. He is a businessman, a professor, an author, a storyteller, an inventor, an oracle, father, friend, and creator of MCAM, CNBC IQ 100 Index, specializing in putting humanity back into humans and business. And in my opinion, he is a dynamic champion of integrity, honesty, and peace. So it's my great pleasure to welcome David Martin to the show, Dr. David Martin to the show.
Joe,
David, hello and welcome.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I have to say, I feel the same way. I feel very honored to have this time with you. I have been so inspired by watching your various presentations on YouTube. I saw you on the recent International Tribunal for Natural Justice, and you are truly a champion for all of us seeking truth and justice in the world. So thank you for everything you do. I just have to share
You're
that
very
with
welcome.
you.
It is an honor to be human and to serve humanity. That has always been and always will be my life's commitment.
I so appreciate that, and I feel the same way for myself. And that's really what this program is all about. It's one of the vehicles to serve humanity by sharing truthful wisdom, knowledge, conversations. And we have a big conversation to have today because you have spent, I have no idea how much time out of your life investigating, going right down into that rabbit hole of what is occurring now in this truly unprecedented time on a global level. And I'm sure as many people are listening, they feel the same way, scratching their heads, just what is happening? And it's all happened so rapidly. And it's been such a profound transformation in our world. And that's what we're going to discuss today. I mean, this COVID thing was the event that instigated a change, but a change had been planned for quite a while.
That's
So
correct.
let's dive in, David, and I'm just going to give you free reign to start where you feel you want to begin because it's such a big story. Let's begin somewhere, and then we can move from there.
Well, I like to make sure everyone gets new content on every show I speak on. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack just to help set the stage for where this kind of started in a broad structural level. Um, Obviously, it's easy to point to the police action, Supreme Court decisions like the 1905 decision on the Jacobson case, which is very famous in terms of public health law. We can fast forward across the last century and see that there have been a number of activities that have gradually eroded the individual's ability to manage the concept and the notion of health at the essentially at the behest of institutional medicine and, more importantly, industrial medicine. Um, but I think it's important in this particular story for your viewers to understand that 1979 is actually a very interesting year in what has become this current problem. And it was in 1979 that, and many people will forget this, but when I say it, they'll maybe remember it. Um, as we saw the emergence of Japan as a technical competitor, there was a law passed in Congress sponsored by Birch Bayh and Robert Dole called the Bayh-Dole Act. This was the act that allowed individuals who were the beneficiaries of federally sponsored research to get patent rights and commercial rights on the research that they did using public funds. The reason why I say that's a very important thing for us to put into context in this situation is that by 1999, the world was poised to understand through federal research that coronavirus was a very specific and interesting viral vector that not only had the ability to infect humans and create various respiratory and other conditions, but because of its nature and because of its highly mutatable format, there were very interesting sets of research being conducted in the late 90s and early 2000s on how one could modify. The term was chimerically modify, and all that means is that you take these viruses that exist in nature and you start messing with them to enhance various attributes of their behavior. But people decided that it would be possible to use coronavirus as a technology with an eye towards the possibility of using a virus as a means of infecting people with other agents. So this idea of chimeric alteration of coronavirus actually goes back to before we heard of SARS. So the public became aware of SARS in 2002. But the chimeric alterations of coronavirus actually were started before that, and they only became visible in a tiny bit in 2002 and 2003 when Asia had its first SARS outbreak that became publicly declared to be an epidemic and then ultimately a pandemic. But the story that I started with in 1979 is important because as early as 1999, a number of researchers realized that there was a problem with just relying on federal funding because SARS, as we found out in 2002 to going into 2003, not only has its virulent stage, but also has a tiny problem of it resolves itself. The human adapts to the exposure to the virus, and in a very short period of time, SARS outbreaks kind of burn themselves out. That presents a problem if you want to have federal funding to support ongoing research. And it is a huge problem if you want to have industrial sponsored research around vaccines or treatments. And so it became very clear in the wake of the 2002 outbreak that patents were sought and filed and ultimately granted on various attributes of the SARS coronavirus. And the CDC, most notably in 2003, sought to patent the coronavirus that was transmitted into humans. That prosecution began in 2003. The actual genome was sought for patent in 2007. The CDC, in a very horrific decision that, in fact, outed the fact that they were onto a conspiracy, rather than letting the patent application be published, which is what the law mandated, they filed a petition with the United States Patent Office in the spring of 2007 to make sure that their patent application was kept private, in direct violation to their public statements that said that they were seeking this patent so that the public could research this topic. And not surprisingly, when we got to 2012, if you recall, when we had the MERS outbreak, which was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which was another version of SARS, there was an enormous amount of money that was put into research that was sponsored by and funded through US taxpayer dollars coming through the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, both National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as well as the Center for Disease Control. And this group of research was actually considered to be at least unethical and possibly illegal in 2013 when people realized that the research that was being done was actually amplifying the danger of coronavirus, where the theoretical and actual risk that we might create a horrific accidental released agent or a purposefully released agent could be highly problematic. And that's the reason why in 2013, National Institutes of Health said that this research should be stopped. And as you know, and this has been well documented, in 2013 going through 2016, right up until actually now, what happened was the people who were involved in doing the research decided to get offshore collaboration at the Wuhan Institute of Virology using US taxpayer dollars to create this situation. Now, the reason I started in 1979 is because the minute you conflate public health research with financial and industrial incentives, you introduce a fatal flaw in integrity. Because Ralph Barrick, who I talk about quite often, the researcher at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, repeatedly states that he has no financial interest in the scientific publications that he makes. But this individual has received tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to flow into his research on the manipulation, modification of coronavirus. He has procured patents directly and through the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and in partnership with other industrial partners for both treatments and diagnosis of coronavirus infections. And this individual has, at the end of his scientific publications, stated that he has no financial or commercial interest in the outcome of his research, which is patently false. He stands to gain, CDC stands to gain, NIAID, Anthony Fauci's organization, stand to gain, and they stand to gain because of that 1979 law. Now, the reason I bring this up at the beginning of our conversation is because when you have a financial interest, and it turns out that the topic that you are researching doesn't stay around long enough to generate a financial cash cow, which is what academic researchers and bureaucratic researchers like to have, the incentive to create a mass scale panic event, which then is going to unleash the federal purse strings that allow for tons and tons of money to be directed at academic and industrial research, which, by the way, are interconnected through and through. This is the reason why I mentioned several weeks ago this is an antitrust issue, is because the federal government and private sector have colluded to rob the Treasury, to literally take money from the US taxpayer and put it in the pockets of industry, all around an event that they controlled by definition. They were the ones that said there was a novel virus when there was no empirical standard set by the World Health Organization's ICTV, the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses. There was no official empirical standard set. There was no evidence provided that wasn't coming from people who had a financial interest in the information that they were presenting. And there was no ability for an independent verification in the United States of either coronavirus prevalence prior to 2019 December timeframe when we said it broke out in China. We don't know when coronavirus in its current form or its current mutations showed up in the United States. And we don't know that because the Center for Disease Control held and maintained a patent that kept anyone from knowing the answer. But they, together with their co-conspiring parties, were the ones that managed this particular campaign of terror.
Okay, David, just to clarify for myself, and I'm sure people watching, exactly what does the CDC really do? It
Yeah.
seems that there are agendas going on. Everything that I am told where I live, you can't do this because the CDC says you can't get to the gym, and the CDC says you can't do that. CDC says you need masks. But, we're talking about an organization that owns patents on modulated chimera vaccines. I mean, if you own a patent, don't you make money from it? And who gets that
Yes.
money? And what's the agenda?
Well, that's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is something that requires kind of forensic inquiry that will bend your mind. Um, the CDC has a foundation, which is a thing you've never heard of. That CDC foundation has all kinds of both donors and patrons and economic participants. And you've never heard of the CDC Foundation because you're not supposed to hear about it. The CDC has congressional appropriations, but they also have the ability to gain access to royalties or licensing fees or other things from their proprietary rights. As you know, they had the ability to block the World Health Organization's coronavirus test kit by telling the United States not to use the kit that was developed in Germany. And then the CDC wanted to insist that its kit be used. But you'll remember that in February, when they insisted that they should be the testing organization in the United States, their first kits were fatally flawed. They couldn't be used. This is a quasi public, quasi commercial organization. And if you go back and you look at its history is as convoluted as you can imagine. It was a organization that during the Second World War went through the transition of being the anti-malarial platform, because it used to be in the US and around the world, it used to be that the US Department of Defense was very concerned with malaria. And so what it used to be was the malaria program, largely funded through DoD appropriations. Then, after the Second World War, it started moving over into other types of activities. But you will recall it was the CDC that recommended the use of DDT, the thing that nearly killed our American iconic bald eagle and destroyed the lives and livelihoods of countless people. It was that CDC that used to advertise that your house was safer if you sprayed DDT everywhere, and your yard was safer if you sprayed DDT everywhere. This organization, which has variously said that smoking is fine, variously said that DDT use is fine, variously said that there is really no health problem with glyphosate sprayed on our food. This organization, like the FDA, like other parts of the Department of Health and Human Services, is an unholy alliance between industry and what is alleged to be health. And the reason why I say alleged is because if you look at what the CDC and if you look at what the FDA do, they play an instrumental role in shielding companies from the liability they would have from killing people and from harming people and from maiming people. Because if the Department of Health and Human Services declares an emergency and the FDA then declares what's called emergency use authorization, or EUA, then the result is that manufacturers are shielded from any liability. If their products harm you, if their products kill you, if their products do anything, they get a blanket immunity. And don't think for a moment that those decisions are taken in the public interest. Those decisions are taken when they are lobbied by various organizations that are industry participants seeking to exploit a liability loophole. And the most egregious in this particular instance is what's happened in this particular alleged pandemic, because by declaring a state of emergency and then by the FDA issuing its emergency use authorization, over 1,300 products right now. Did you hear what I just said? 1,300 products are in various forms of clinical trials on humans or on animals or anything else. These trials are going on, and no company, no executive in a company, no researcher associated with a company has any liability for the acts that they take which harm humanity.
Mm.
This is as bad, and it really is, because this was what we tried Germans for in Nuremberg. This is how bad it is. And no one in the United States is actually having the courage or the integrity of saying that that is fundamentally wrong. The FDA and the CDC have conspired with corporations to shovel now billions of dollars of truly, really, it's carte blanche. It is as close to blank check authorization as you can get, with no impunity for any acts that they take. So when you hear a governor, or when you hear Anthony Fauci say, well, we need to maintain this declaration of emergency until we have a vaccine or a therapy, you as an American would think, oh, he's interested in us being healthy. That's not what he's interested in. He's guaranteeing immunity from corporations who have the ability to harm us with zero consequence. And as long as they maintain this state of fear, they ensure to each corporation both a pipeline of getting taxpayer money with no oversight, and worse than that, they guarantee that any action they take during this period of time, they have no liability for whatsoever.
Well, it's a perfect win-lose situation. Win for them and lose for us.
Yes. So the illusion that somehow this has to do with our health is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. The Center for Disease Control and the FDA have conspired with industry to harm America. And that is the truth. And that is what needs to be spoken.
And so is the National Institute of Health. They're also part of this.
Well, at the end of
conspiracy.
The day, all roads lead up through this wonderful Department of Health and Human Services, where any pretend, kind of fig leaf of independence, whether it's the National Science Academy, whether it's or National Academy of Sciences, whether it's National Institutes of Health, whether it's the Department of Health and Human Services, they are all in this together. And at the end of the day, who writes the check? And by the way, it bleeds over to the DoD, because DARPA has its Triple P program, which is actually using all of the same players, but using black budgets coming out of DARPA and the Department of Defense to fund things which are all done in the name of the warfighter. But as I said in yesterday's video, for those of you who haven't seen my YouTube video, Butterfly of the Week, this past one, the one I shot on the 25th of May, that in that video, I talk about the fact that under the emergency use authorization that the FDA has, the DoD has an absolute waiver of any liability on any active military member to do any trial they want to do with no informed consent, with no limitations, and with no liability. So this whole thing is just a license for industry to run amok, and all done so under the authorization of a law that has to be changed. And every citizen has to make sure that no elected official gets to go to Washington or gets to go to a state house without addressing this.
Well, okay, so I have some big questions. I want to, what you're saying, I want to just hold that, because I have one other thing just on the COVID, and then we're talk about the bigger consequence of what's happening to the world. It's not just our country, because CDC is kind of taken as the law in countries all over the world. They follow whatever
Correct.
the CDC says. So the University of North Carolina began this research on making this novel coronavirus, which now is,
Correct.
I mean, it's pretty, I mean, you can say it was created, right? It was created.
Well,
but they have a relationship with...
You're right. It at least was manipulated. Right.
Right. So they have funded and have a relationship with this Wuhan biohazard for lab. So they're working together. Yeah. We're blaming China for the release of this virus, but in actual fact, what's going on? Who's really behind this? Because obviously it is, I mean, is China in the US, or are there parties in China and parties here that are in collusion together? Because it seems to me you can no longer blame this lab for the release of something which was funded and started here.
Well, and I am very careful to remind people that a long time ago, the headlines and reality don't match. I mean, you look at something that is as self evidently in error as the fact that we, in September of 2019, had all of the individuals involved get together. And for the World Health Organization, all these individuals said we need to have a respiratory pandemic exercise. That's in September. In October, they have Event 201 where they lay out the protocol for how they're going to deal with a coronavirus outbreak. And somehow we're supposed to be gullible enough to believe that nature on its own just backed itself into a story of human creation. Now, I know there are people who would love to be the architects and little gods running around creating the platform upon which nature acts. But I'm not gullible enough to believe that conspiracy. I actually think that if you have the only places on the planet that were expressly working together on a chimeric variant of coronavirus, the only place on the planet where that was happening happens to be where the nature outbreak happens. You know, the statistical improbability of that happening is non calculable. So,
Mm-hmm.
there has been, in my argument, and I wrote about this several months ago, there's a very interesting thing. If you look at where the alleged outbreaks happen, Northern Italy, New York, Seattle area, the Wuhan area, interestingly enough, bats with coronavirus are prevalent in every single place that we saw an alleged outbreak. And I want to just make something very clear to every listener that you have. This problem of calling it an outbreak is a problem where the CDC and the World Health Organization and every other country is conflating testing for something and the existence of something. If I were to say today that I am going to test for calories in food, and before today, no one ever tested for calories in food. Just because I'm testing doesn't mean calories didn't exist before. It just means I'm now testing for them. The same is the case for coronavirus. We have no information, but we have an indication that coronavirus 2.0, the one that we're currently being told to fear, may have been here for months or years untested. And every governor, every head of state, every part of the World Health Organization that's been trying to tell us that, oh my gosh, infections are running rampant, conspicuously fails to tell you how many tests they've done. Because it turns out that if you test for a thing, you will statistically rarely find it. And we know that somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population will test positive for the presence of a fragment of coronavirus. Does that mean that this is a new virus? No. Does it mean it's a mutation of the one in 2002 and 2003 or the one in 2012 and 2013? No, it doesn't mean anything. It simply means we're now testing for something. And every single public health officer, every single governor, and every single head of state that says that coronavirus is running rampant is lying because they cannot handle the truth. And the truth is, we're not having an outbreak. We are testing for something we didn't test for before. And part of the reason why we didn't test for it before is because the CDC held and maintained a patent that kept people from testing for it. So it's not as though we can sit there going, well, people should have been testing. No, they couldn't test because the test was withheld because of a patent. So the issue that we have is a simple situation where the facts are being misreported because we don't know whether the bats in northern Italy, whether the bats in New York, and whether the bats in Seattle also have a coronavirus similar to the alteration of the bats in Wuhan. Now, the reason why you haven't heard this, despite the fact that the researchers who were researching the chimeric coronavirus are the ones who gave me this data. They're the ones that actually found coronavirus mutations in bats in all of these locations. They're not talking about it because it would jeopardize the theoretical nature of this pandemic. We have to say it came out of Wuhan. We have to get a US China story going because we need drama. But the fact of the matter is, there is not a shred of evidence that says that that is in fact the case. We know that the two researchers who are the experts on this coronavirus have been collaborating on chimeric coronavirus since 2016. We know that. So, do you believe, or should I believe, or should anybody believe that this is novel? No.
Just want all my viewers to know we've had to change cameras for David, so it may look like something has happened, and it did. So we'll carry on. Okay. Okay, David. So that's really been useful and helpful information to help us understand it. And really, this conversation is helping people to wake up. Well, we've been put into a stupor. We have been propagandized for a long time anyway. And if people are watching television or listening to the radio, reading the newspapers, which I don't do, so I am not stimulated by fear every hour on the hour,
Right.
or through the whole show, because it is a propaganda tool. And I know so many people are terrified. I just see how many people are wearing the masks. I mean, everything has changed in our societies. Everything has changed around the world, actually. What is the end game? What is the end game that this has initiated? Give us an understanding of where this is going to lead us if we don't wake up to the fact that it has been created. It has been created to be a pandemic situation requiring all these drastic measures for the purpose of enriching certain factions of our government, private industry. But is there more? Because this is taking away civil liberties. This is taking away freedom. This is taking away everything that we have known. And it's doing it around the world. It's a global shift.
Yes. There's a clear distinction that I think we need to make between opportunism and malevolent actors. So let's get the opportunists out of the way first. There is no question that the medical industrial complex is celebrating, as I said before, the removal of immunity and their impunity to do any research they want on the federal dime. That is potentially opportunism, and it is potentially malevolent. I would go as far as to say, for example, that the Sherlock Biosciences company out of the Northeast here in the US, which was funded by the organization that funded Event 201 and all of the scenario planning leading up to the pandemic, my guess is that they have something to do with something more than just opportunism. I think that they actually have some architecting roles in this. And I think the UNC Chapel Hill, CDC, NIAID collaboration, and the Gilead Sciences and the Moderna vaccine program, Johnson & Johnson, Sanofi, and a few others are probably in the architecture side of this. But there's opportunists who take advantage of this thing. But then there are actual real malevolent actors. And there are a group of malevolent actors who have an enormous benefit from what's happening in this scenario. And they are the ones who ironically benefited from the global financial crisis in 2008. And that is the financial institutions that have received unbelievable benefit from creating a mass deflection, a mass kind of hypnosis that says that in the name of this public health crisis, massive funds are actually being directed to financial institutions, including life insurers and including banks. Now, when I say that, people sit there going, whoa, 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 this is not about public health or anything else. But look very carefully. I'll give you an example. The payroll protection program that we saw passed by Congress. In that program, long before the program mentioned the value of supplying money so that people could get their paychecks, in the first couple lines of the authorization of that program, the actual description of the beneficiary was to make sure that life insurance premiums could be paid. You never heard that discussed. You never saw on any media outlet that before payroll was mentioned, life insurance beneficiaries were mentioned. You never saw mentioned that when the money had to pass through banks, what Congress was doing was creating assets for banks, because when debt is issued against companies, that creates assets on bank balance sheets. So as much as you want to be told, oh, Congress really did a great thing by making $3 trillion available for small business and business in the United States, that is absolutely false. What they did was they handed banks $3 trillion of debt. Those are assets that banks now hold over business. That is not an accident. And by the way, it's not an accident when it's written right into the authorization bill. The fact that life insurance and banks are ahead of the payroll of small business in the actual authorization means they are directly benefiting from and culpable for this action. And I can guarantee you, with no question at all, that those institutions, when they do not pay pensions, when they do not guarantee social programs like Medicare, Social Security, and others, when all of those promises to the American investing public fail, what those financial institutions are going to do is they're going to say, remember 2020? Remember when the world shut down? And they are going to be exonerated for their mismanagement of funds leading up to this. And they will use this event as the excuse that justifies the meltdown of the United States economy and the mismanagement and fiduciary irresponsibility of financial institutions. And if you want to know where my bet is on who architected all of this, there is no question that somewhere between a third and a half of this architecture came from financial institutions who knew they were heading towards insolvency, and they got a bailout under the guise of a public health global pandemic. Just like in 2008, banks got a bailout of their credit default swap abuses on mortgages and consumer loans that they mismanaged. And do you remember? Not a single bank executive and no rating agency had any culpability whatsoever. That playbook worked in 08, and it's working again. And we are going to be told, remember 2020.
David, are you saying that the financial institutions are so powerful that they have the ability to control this planet, to control through whatever means, lobbying or whoever, congressmen, senators, institutions of all sorts globally, to create an event of this magnitude?
I am saying without equivocation that banks and a few investment management firms and a few very wealthy individuals, largely who run hedge funds, have the ability to unleash anything on this planet with impunity. And I'm saying that because they have. Whether that is influencing elections, whether that is taking down governments, whether that is appropriating entire countries' resources so that the country is nothing but a puppet. And the idea of elected officials are nothing but puppets. I'm saying without question that the idea of a sovereign nation state has been taken over by a corporate and banking state, and that has been the case for a very long time. What we're seeing is the end of an illusion. And the illusion has been that we believe that our elected officials stand in our interest. But why is it that if you are a constitutional lawyer and you're in the state of Oregon, why is it that you are allowing a governor to declare that in restaurant seating is now a thing of the past? In Virginia, where just 2 minutes ago, our tyrannical governor is going to announce, according to his lackeys who have been running in front of him, that he's going to make face mask wearing a statute now, or at least an emergency declaration in Virginia. Where are any of the voices of people who actually would stand up and say enough? And here's the problem. The problem is you have one or two very notable and very, very reputable individuals who have used their professional and used their experience and used their legal background and used their corporate background to stand against this immense tide. But it is so few that it is a statistical anomaly. We do not have elected officials standing up for us, with the exception of a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of state house, state representatives, and state senators. We don't have anybody on the national scene doing it. We don't have any judges actually stepping in and making statements that declare the Constitution to be a fundamental, inalienable right. We do not have that because the institutions that we have come to think are those controlled by democratic processes have been purchased. And we are watching the theater of politics being played on an off-Broadway, pathetic theater.
So corruption is so deep, it has now permeated every aspect of life.
Which, as I said in my film American Revolution, is great. It's great because, as I said in American Revolution, this was an experiment. America was an experiment. And that's a great thing because, like I said in the film, experiments are for a reason. We do experiments to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And now we, the people, in every state and in the United States, have within our governing documents the ability to say when the government no longer works, the people have the right to form a government that does. Guess what? Our forebears. In my case, I look out across my dining room table to Thomas Jefferson's house, Monticello, where between 1781 and 1789, these documents were written for this moment. And the moment is that when the government no longer serves the people, which is constructed by and for the people, then the people have the right to actually find redress and form a government that does work. The experiment was hijacked. Now it's time for we, the people, to take it back because that's what we can do. And that's what the laws were written to accommodate. We're just the lucky generation that gets to remember the mountaintops at Monticello, that gets to remember the constitutional conventions. We're the lucky ones that get to say that experiment got hijacked. A new experiment is starting.
Okay, wow, I'm just breathing because it's it's just challenging everything right now.
Yes,
It's challenging
it is.
everything.
But
And
we are here, Cheryl. We arrived in this moment in history together. This conversation that we're having right now can be what in 220 years people read about in the history books, when the citizens of America remembered who they were. What a beautiful thing.
well, it's a beautiful thing if we can remember and if we
Yeah.
have a plan to take back those freedoms guaranteed to us.
Yeah.
So, this is my last question to you because you've been so generous with your time and laying all this out. What is it that we must do at this time, David? I think a lot of people are asking
So,
that question.
yeah, so there are 3 steps. The first step is an immediate one. And that first step involves taking action, and the actions that I recommend, as I recommended in the video I just produced on May the 25th. There is a thing called Standard Form 95. I have it on my YouTube channel at David Martin World. Standard Form 95 is a mechanism whereby every citizen has the ability to hold that organization that created a financial or actual harm to them liable for that harm. That was a form that was developed after laws were passed in the wake of the 1986 Supreme Court ruling, the United States versus Stanley. And what it does is it gives people the right to seek damages from the Department of Health and Human Services, who has orchestrated this particular chaos. Citizens can do that at no cost. They have to just tell the truth, because there's a penalty if you actually lie on a form like that. But if you're telling the truth about actual things that actually were harmed by the Department of Health and Human Services actions, that information is all available and all downloadable from the YouTube link on my website or on davidmartin.world. So that's number one. Number two, there is a need immediately for individuals and organizations that have been harmed to actually take legal action against governors who have violated the law. And I have a very detailed complaint that anyone can use. Not only is it available on my content, but hopefully a couple of organizations like SSB America, Saving Small Business, and others have put the information up on their websites. That information is available for anyone to use, and that information lays out the basis upon which you can work within your state to make sure that the governors and public health officers and mayors are held accountable for their illegal actions. So that information is out there. And then the third step, and this is the one that is the most important. No person running for public office going into the fall of this year should be allowed to get your vote if they do not have a plan and make a sovereign commitment to erase the broad and overreaching police state powers that have been abused in this action. The only way that gets changed is through legislative reform, and there should be no one standing for public office that is not held accountable to actually go to Washington or go to their state house and change the Police Powers Acts that allow governors and public health officials to get unchecked abilities to destroy the lives and livelihoods of individuals for capricious reasons. The police state acts that were supported based on the 1905 Supreme Court decision have to be overturned, and that is a legislative program that every single citizen of the United States must demand of their elected officials. And if your officials do not have a plan to overturn police state authority, then they should not be elected, because whoever comes in next will continue to ride roughshod over your rights if that is not changed.
Okay, well, that's what we need. We need action steps. I
Yep.
hope this conversation goes far and wide, because we really need to get the conversation we had today out there into the world.
That's correct.
Beyond the United States, out into the world,
Absolutely.
because this is a huge wake up moment. I just want to say that, having looked at some astrology, and I have been following what people are saying, and for those who may not even mean anything to them, but astrologically, there have been a unique configuration of energies and planets that were known to happen in 2020 that would make a radical change in the direction we've been going. And in the direction we've been going has been based on everything you just shared with us, how we have been hijacked. And now this is the opportunity, the potential that we could have this huge wake up moment and change a corrupt, sick, abusive society, world society, because the bankers we're talking about are international bankers in every country of the world.
Absolutely.
Right?
We have a beautiful moment, and that's why I tell people the reason I am absolutely committed to what I'm doing, and the reason why I'm so passionate about sharing this, is because we have a moment in time that we have been entrusted to act. And it is our stewardship that will determine the outcome. It's what each one of us chooses to do in this moment that will determine the outcome. And I happen to hold that the best thing to do is to use all of the tools that were architected hundreds of years ago by individuals who saw liberty as a value, and who saw opportunity as a value, and who saw the declaration of humanity over the tyranny of kings and despots and rulers. Those individuals who saw a bright future have put into our hands the tools that we can use to rebuild that future that has been now taken from us. It's on us to pick up those tools and use them.
It's a profound moment in the history of this country, history of the planet. Wow. Okay. Well, unless you have one last thought you'd like to share with us, I think there's a lot to digest in this conversation. Is there anything else you just want to close with, David?
I would simply say each one of us is now entrusted with much, and for much we will be accountable. So let's make the best of what we have.
Well, thank you so much. That you have given us such a deep and profound understanding of this moment in time, so we can have greater clarity, David, so we can move forward with power, with awareness, with a vision to help us create something that will lead us to a brighter future and a true expression of the freedoms that we have been given in this country. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything you do. Yes, thank you.
You're most welcome.
And I hope everyone visits your website, davidmartin.world, because those forums are there. That's a way to keep them up to date with all the information that you are sharing on a regular basis. There's a new documentaries coming out. You'll be sharing more of this information, and a place where people can refer their friends, colleagues, so everyone can start waking up. It's a wake-up time.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And everyone, we probably all need to take a deep breath right now. And please continue to watch the many episodes on living a totally healthy life on Total Health TV. You can go to our Facebook page, you can go to our YouTube channel, and you can go to totalhealthtelevision.com as well. So more of these profound, in-depth, freedom creating conversations to come. Hope to see you soon. Bye for now.